Hi guys, welcome back to Holes by Sachar. We are currently on chapter 30. This is video 2, part 2 of it. So we've had Zigzag and Stanley actually get into a fight because the other boys were upset that Zero was digging out Stanley's hole, and it caused an issue that then Mr. Pendansky got involved with. By Mr. Pendansky actually kind of supported the idea of the boys fighting, and it ended up being a huge issue where Zigzag was beating up Stanley. Zero stepped in but was then choking Zigzag, and then after that I believe it was Armpit pulled Zero off of Zigzag. So it was just a big fight between the boys. So I'll just read the last bit on page 136. Yeah, said Zigzag, like X-Ray said, working so hard in the hot sun, while Caveman just sits around doing nothing. My blood boiled. Excuse me? Said the warden. Caveman digs his holes just like everyone else. Zigzag shrugged. Sometimes. Excuse me? Zero's been digging part of Caveman's hole every day, said Squid. The warden looked from Squid to Stanley to Zero. I'm teaching him to read and write, said Stanley. It's sort of a trade. The hole still gets dug, so it doesn't matter who digs it. Excuse me? Said the warden. Isn't it more important for him to learn to read? Stanley asked. Doesn't that build character more than digging holes? Good point, Stanley. Good point. That's his character, said the warden. What about your character? Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. The warden turned to Zero. Well, Zero, what have you learned so far? Zero said nothing. Have you just been digging Caveman's hole for nothing? The warden asked him. He likes to dig holes, said Mr. Pendansky. Tell me what you learned yesterday, said the warden. Surely you can remember that. Zero said nothing. Mr. Pendansky laughed. He picked up a shovel and said, You might as well try to teach this shovel to read. It's got more brains than Zero. The at sound, said Zero. The at sound, repeated the warden. Well then, tell me, what does C-A-T spell? Zero glanced around uneasily. Stanley knew he knew the answer. Zero just didn't like answering questions. Cat, Zero said. Mr. Pendansky clapped his hands. Bravo, bravo, the boy's a genius. F-A-T, asked the warden. Zero thought a moment. Stanley hadn't taught him the F sound yet. F, Zero whispered. F, fat, fat. How about hat, H-A-T, asked the warden. Stanley hadn't taught him the H sound either. Zero concentrated hard, then said, Chat? All the counselors laughed. He's a genius, all right, said Mr. Pendansky. He's so stupid he doesn't even know he's stupid. Stanley didn't know why Mr. Pendansky seemed to have it in for Zero. If Mr. Pendansky only thought about it, he'd realize that it was very logical for Zero to think that the letter H made the ch sound, right? When we say the letter F, he didn't know the sound for F. It goes F. Oh, fat. H goes, if you say the name for H, H. So he thinks it makes the ch sound. Okay, from now on, I don't want anyone digging anyone else's holes, said the warden. And no more reading lessons. I'm not digging another hole, said Zero. Good, said the warden. She turned to Stanley. You know why you're digging holes? Because it's good for you. It teaches you a lesson. If Zero digs your hole for you, then you're not learning your lesson, are you? I guess not, Stanley mumbled, although he knew they weren't digging just to learn a lesson. She was looking for something that belonged to Kissin' Kate Barlow. Why can't I dig my own hole, but still teach Zero to read, he asked. What's wrong with that? I'll tell you what's wrong with that, the warden said. It leads to trouble. Zero almost killed Zigzag. It causes him stress, said Mr. Pendanski. I know you mean well, Stanley, but face it, Zero's too stupid to learn to read. That's what makes his blood boil, not the hot sun. I'm not digging another hole, said Zero. Mr. Pendanski handed him the shovel. Here, take it, Zero. It's all you'll ever be good for. Zero took the shovel. Then he swung it like a baseball bat. The metal blade smashed across Mr. Pendanski's face. His knees crumpled beneath him. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. The counselors all drew their guns. Zero held the shovel out in front of him, as if he were going to try to bat away the bullets. I hate digging holes, he said. Then he slowly backed away. Don't shoot him, said the warden. He can't go anywhere. The last thing we need is an investigation. So she's not worried about shooting Zero and saying, whoa, 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 we need to stop all this violence. She's worried about an investigation. Zero kept backing up, out past the cluster of holes the boys had been digging, then farther and farther out onto the lake. He's going to have to come back for water, the warden said. Stanley noticed Zero's canteen lying on the ground near his hole. A couple of the counselors helped Mr. Pendanski to his feet and into the truck. Stanley looked out toward Zero, but he had disappeared into the haze. The warden ordered the counselors to take turns guarding the shower room and rec room all day and all night. They were not to let Zero drink any water. When he returned, he was to be brought directly to her. She examined her fingernails and said, It's almost time for me to paint my nails again. Before she left, she told the 6 remaining members of Group D that she still expected 7 holes. All right, so we do see in this chapter, Zero does lose his cool. His blood starts to boil. It's not because he's digging holes, even though he does say he hates digging holes. Anybody would hate digging holes. It's because in this chapter, we can see how Zero is trying to better himself. He's trying to actually build character by learning how to read. Because by reading books, by reading information and different opinions or different ways of life, it does build our character. We learn to understand other people's points of view. We learn to see other people's cultures or ways of life and understand them and have acceptance for them. It builds character. Digging holes doesn't build any character. Zero is trying to do that. And yet in this chapter, it was very, very evident that nobody actually believed that he could learn to read. They kept calling him dumb, he doesn't know what he's doing. Mr. Pendanski, up until the last couple chapters, seemed to be of all the adults at the camp, seemed to be okay. We see in this situation where he is making fun of Zero. He's, minimizing the effort that Zero has put into trying to learn to read. So we do see Zero does lose his temper and hits Mr. Pendansky across the head with the shovel and then leaves. And now they've been directed that if they see Zero, they can't give him anything to drink, and that he has to be brought directly to the warden. So we see how all this digging of holes and the whole feeling of the area of Camp Green Lake is not one of building character. It's one of anger and frustration. And it's an environment where people are only looking out for themselves. Only for themselves. It's what we call like a toxic environment. We have all the boys who have learned to only look out for themselves. And if they see somebody working together, like Zero and Stanley were, then they get angry about that, which leads to them being, the adults being angry. And everybody's just angry and on edge. And it has now erupted with Zero having his outburst and now leaving camp. So I hope Zero is okay. And I hope we read further about him in the further chapters. All right, guys, take care.